All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Shane Mullen. I am the event host at Left Bank Books, the event coordinator at Left Bank Books. And tonight you are joining us as we welcome internationally recognized thought leader in the fields of diversity, equity, and inclusion, Michael Bach, who will discuss the book that is everything you need to know about creating LGBTQ2+ inclusive workplace from A to Z, Alphabet Soup. I'll look the book. Alphabet Soup, the essential guide to LGBTQ+ inclusion at work. Tonight, Bach will be in conversation with Webster University's Chief Diversity Officer, Vincent C. Flewellen. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Michael and Vincent, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for your friends on our website, left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating. And I want to also add that Michael was so kind to be able to send some really incredible swag. So we have a luggage tag, some really beautiful magnets, and stickers, because everyone loves stickers. And speaking of stickers, I wanted to show everyone in the audience 2 new stickers that we have that are available at Left Bank Books. We just got these in, and I grabbed them because I was in love with them and brought them home to show you all. As I said, I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. We produce hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment, and you can do that at any point in time as you think of it. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. I do want to say that today is International Trans Day of Visibility. I have so many things that I want to say, but I do want to take this moment to celebrate today by thanking all of our trans brothers and sisters and say that we see you and we support you. Tonight, I will be making a donation to the Metro Trans Umbrella Group, MTUG, in honor of this Day of Visibility, so that people in the trans community can continue to be courageous and live their lives. And I want to just encourage you to do the same. And I will share a link to MTUG and how you can make a donation in the chat. But now about tonight's book, Alphabet Soup, the essential guide to LGBTQ2+ inclusion at work. What you aren't doing about creating an LGBTQ2+ inclusive workplace is costing you more than you might think. Every year, companies who aren't doing the necessary work are losing millions of dollars to low productivity, staff turnover, missed opportunities, and reputational damage. And no, simply slapping a label, simply slapping a rainbow over your company logo every June isn't going to cut it. It's not. In this myth-busting follow-up to the 2020 breakout bestseller, Birds of All Feathers, diversity and inclusion expert Michael Bach breaks down everything you need to know about creating inclusive workplaces for people who don't fit squarely into the straight and cis box. And don't worry if you're already feeling lost. By the time you've finished this book, you'll know exactly what LGBTQ2+ means, and a whole lot of other stuff to boot. With clarity and a healthy dose of humor, Bach lays out a roadmap on how to ensure your workplace is safe for LGBTQ2+ people. You'll gain a clear understanding of sexuality, gender identity, and gender expression. Yes, they're different things, and it matters. What a safe space is, and how to turn your workplace into one. How to create and properly enforce a workplace code of conduct, and how to grab a piece of the fabulous pink dollar, worth more than $1 trillion annually in Canada and the US alone. This is a must-read for leaders, HR professionals, CEOs, and managers of all levels. Alphabet Soup is a critical guide to creating a truly inclusive workplace for all, regardless of sexuality, gender identity, or gender expression. Whether you consider yourself an ally or don't even know what it means to be one, you'll come away armed with everything you need to know to create a safe, productive, and thriving organization. And now about tonight's speakers. Michael Bach is internationally recognized as a thought leader in the fields of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He is the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, which he founded in 2012 to help educate Canadians on the value of diversity and inclusion. Bach has received repeated recognition for his work, including being named as one of the Women of Influence's Canadian Diversity Champions in 2011 and 2012, and receiving the 2011 Inspire Award as LGBTQ Person of the Year. Tonight, Mike will be in conversation with Vincent C. Flewellen. Vincent joined Webster University in October 2018. Reporting directly to the Chancellor, he provides key leadership for the university's core value of advancing diversity and inclusion as part of the educational mission through the university's network of domestic and international locations. With more than 20 years of experience weaving diversity, inclusion, and equity into the culture of education in the St. Louis area, Flewellen most recently served as Director of Equity and Inclusion at the College School in Webster Groves. Before taking his role at the College School, he taught in the Ladue School District and for Mary Institute and St. Louis Country Day School. He also served as Director of the University City Children's Center. In response to the murder of George Floyd, Flewellen launched Webster Speaks, dialogues on race, equity, and inclusion. As host of the virtual series, he sits down with thought leaders and prominent Black voices and other people of color to discuss issues surrounding systemic racism. For his years of work promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in education, Flewellen was named to the St. Louis Business Journal's 2020 class of diverse business leaders. Flewellen holds a Master of Social Work from the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis, and his Bachelor of Arts in Education is from Maryville University. And he is currently pursuing a doctorate of education through Webster University's School of Education. And now, without further ado, I am so happy and proud to welcome our guests for tonight's event. I am thrilled that you were joining us, and if you could please help me in giving them a giant round of applause as I welcome to the screen Michael Bach and Vincent C. Flewellen.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me as well, Shane. Michael, let's just get started right here. What a fun book that, as we were backstage discussing, I love this book. And the reason why I particularly love this book is because so often books, that address issues around the LGBTQ2+ community are much more just kind of broad. Yours is very specific in terms of the workplace. And I think that that's something that we rarely discuss. And so I loved reading through this. And so why did you feel it was important to write this book?
I needed money. No. Anybody knows that writing a book is not a way to make money. I have been working in LGBTQ2+ inclusion for 35 years almost. And professionally, I've been working in the field of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility now for 17 years. But I've been very involved in the queer community for since I came out, and I'm still answering the same questions that I've been answering for 20, 30 years. And I looked at what was going on across the world, but Florida recently is a perfect example of why we need a book like this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think, with due respect to the governor and the politicians who enacted that piece of legislation, there's just a lack of understanding of the impact of that. They don't know what they're doing. And so I wrote a book with the objective of helping to address some of that. I came out at a very tumultuous time. It was the beginning of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. What we thought was the middle was not the middle, but the very beginning, I faced a lot of discrimination, abuse for being queer. And I don't want queer kids to experience that anymore. I dedicated the book to every 9-year-old LGBTQ2 plus kid because I actually announced that I was gay when I was 9. And thank you. And I wanted to make sure that people understand that being LGBTQ2 plus is not a bad thing, and we should celebrate it, and in fact, arguably take advantage of it.
What do you mean by take advantage of it?
Well, I think when I look at the entire conversation around inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, I think employers should be taking advantage of everything that a person can bring to that organization. And so when I think about taking advantage of my identity, others' identity, it's about creating space where I can flourish, where I don't have to change who I am. I can literally, it's the bring your whole self to work conversation. But most employers, when they talk about bringing your whole self to work, it's more about tolerating it. It's the infamous plug my nose. Yes, we'll allow you to be Black or queer or whatever. But I don't want you to allow it. I don't want to be tolerated. My mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, she tolerated me. I want to be celebrated. I want to be seen as bringing that valuable asset to a work environment. And I think that when it's a benefit to the employer, it becomes a benefit to the employee.
Because then the employee is able to fully show up as, right?
Exactly.
And productivity for the employer is increased. Yep.
Engagement, creativity, innovation, everybody wins.
Yes. Can you break down the difference between things like sexuality and gender? And then also let's just kind of have a primer around LGBTQ plus 2 and what it all means.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like we need to apologize first, because as a community or a group of communities, we stuck things together that didn't necessarily go together. So sexual orientation is who you are romantically and or sexually or physically attracted to, right? Gender identity is how a person identifies. Sometimes your gender identity matches your sex assigned at birth. I say sex assigned at birth because, of course, you don't know what a person's gender is by looking at their genitals. But when a child is born, the doctor, nurse, doula, cab driver, whoever looks down, says it's a boy or it's a girl. And what they really should be saying is it's male or it's female. Gender identity is it's your brain. It's what you see yourself as. It's how you identify. And sometimes that matches with your body and sometimes it doesn't. Gender expression is how a person presents themselves. And that can be through physical characteristics, like I have a beard, which is a masculine defined trait. Makeup, long hair versus short hair, the tone of your voice. There's any number of things. How a person presents and how society as a whole views those characteristics. Gender expression and gender identity are not always the same thing. And I'll give you an example, and I'm going to use myself. So I identify as gender nonconforming. I'm cisgender, gender nonconforming, which usually confuses people. But what it means is I'm frankly good with my penis. I'm good with others being good with my penis. but I do not fit the stereotypes of masculinity and am much more comfortable with my feminine side. But my gender expression is typically masculine. I wear suits, I have a beard, I have body hair. I don't fit that, I have no desire to change any of that. So you can't necessarily assume that because a person identifies as trans, identifies as non-binary, et cetera, that their gender expression may be any different. If we break down the infamous alphabet, and I should start by saying, the initialism that I use in the book is just one of many potential initialisms, and they're all good. Mm-hmm. The L stands for lesbian, intended to be people who identify as women who are attracted emotionally, romantically, sexually to other women. The G tends to stand for gay, which is supposed to be about people who identify as men who, again, are attracted to other men. We sometimes see people, women, people of other genders who use the term gay, largely because they don't necessarily identify with any of the other terms in the initialism. B is for bisexual, person who of any gender is attracted to people of other genders, and it's not exclusively one gender. The T, sometimes for us, it stands for trans or trans-identified, which is meant to be an umbrella term to be inclusive of all identities under the gender diverse world. Traditionally, we'd see it stand as transgender, but the term trans or trans-identified has been adopted to be more inclusive. Then we get the Q, which stands for queer. Queer can be a sexual orientation, a gender identity, or both. And that has historically been a pejorative term, but it has been adopted by some members of the community to sort of take control of it and own it. And it's meant to be something that is more inclusive than some of the other terms that we have in the initialism. Then the two, which is a term you may or may not be familiar with, two-spirit is what it stands for. And it is a term that is used by some indigenous people, so Native Americans, Native Alaskans, Native Hawaiians, that it can be a sexuality, can be a gender identity, can also be a spiritual identity. And it tends to be manifested in the idea of having both masculine and feminine spirit. And then the plus sign is intended, and I emphasize intended, to be an indicator that there is so much more to the initialism than the LGBTQ2. So there are lots of other identities that are not included in those letters and number. And we want to make a point of saying that there are more identities. Be aware of that. So somebody that identifies as non-binary or genderqueer or pansexual, we don't want to leave them out. Their identities are as important as anyone else's. But of course, if you've seen some of the initialisms, they kind of run on, it's like we're getting paid by the foot. And at some point, it just becomes too difficult to say on a regular basis. I will tell you, there's 449 references to LGBTQ2 plus in my book. So if that initialism got any longer, it would be like War and Peace.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think about from the space of, inclusion and the purpose of, the plus, but at the same time, we still are in many ways still not seeing the other individuals, right? And absolutely. I think it's a position of privilege still for those of us who are a part of the community for us to always keep in mind, right?
100%.
That we are still leaving out members of our own community by simplifying, LGBTQ2 plus. And I love the two spirit piece. I think is fantastic. And you spoke of the word queer as being, kind of this negative for a long time, and I fall into that category. I personally do not like the use of the word queer to define me, because I remember it's violent to me. I associate violence to the use of that word. While I certainly understand members of the community who decide to reclaim it, I choose not to, and it's very similar to other words that are used often to describe Black folks.
Yes.
And I choose not to reclaim those.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned also, as you kind of defined yourself, and there's a part in the book where you talk about making a phone call to the bank.
Yes.
And as you said in the book, you assume the woman on the end, right? By the sound of her voice or their voice and their name being Barbara, that you made the assumption that it was a woman. Mm-hmm. But when you said you were calling to add your husband to your account, they asked you a question, mm-hmm. What's your wife's name?
And I didn't say husband, I said spouse.
Spouse, I apologize.
No, not at all. But that's what caused the problem.
That's right.
And I make the assumption, I mean, let's face it, I am not the butchest thing in the world, and I'm very comfortable with that. So when people hear me talk, I mean, up until I was probably 25, they thought I was my mother. But I make the assumption that people just make that assumption about me. And I rely on that. And she didn't. Mm-hmm. And she said, I said, I want to add my spouse to the account. And she said, oh, what's your wife's name? And I have to say, there was this moment, if she could have seen my face, I was like, Queen, really? His name is Mike. And yes, I'm in a same name relationship. It was that moment of, oh, right. Okay. We're still doing that. Now that was, 13 years ago. But still, it was just a moment of realizing that we're still in that world of heteronormative, cisnormative behavior.
I also thought, I think about the internalized piece. And if I recall correctly about that moment, also, you kind of felt pretty good about the fact that they might have assumed that you were heterosexual.
I wouldn't say good.
Okay.
There was a point in my life where I would have said, I want to be assumed to be straight. Mm-hmm. But I got over that a long time ago. And now I don't want to be assumed to be straight. I don't want people to make that assumption about me. I'm me, and I'm very happy with me. And I don't like when people make that sort of generalization and assumption, just as I'm sure that people who are trans and non-binary don't like being misgendered. It's just, it's the old saying, when you make an assumption, you make an ass out of you and me. And mostly it's just making an ass out of you.
But let's talk a little bit about the workplace and our community of, LGBTQ2 plus. And what would you say, why should organizations really have this focus on inclusion? And why does it ultimately matter for them?
Yeah, so it's going to sound very capitalist. This is about talent. And we're facing huge talent shortages. Pick an industry, we are facing talent shortages for a variety of reasons. And not just in the service industry, which has seen a huge shift because of COVID, but lots of people have retired and, there's so much there. So from a talent perspective, you want to be able to attract the best and the brightest. Mm-hmm. And the best and the brightest come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And if there's any moment that causes me to question whether or not it's going to be a safe environment for me, then I'm going to go elsewhere because I got choices. Mm-hmm. So it's about talent. And then once you hire them, it's about retaining them. And it's about higher levels of engagement and higher levels of productivity and creativity and innovation and all things that benefit businesses, benefit organizations. And this is not just about the for-profit world. It's also about universities and colleges. It's about hospitals. It's about community centers. And so if there's anything that I have to leave at the door, then I'm not able to contribute fully. So if I, let's say for sake of argument that I had real passing privilege and I wasn't out at work, I'm constantly thinking about the pronouns. I don't talk about my spouse. I don't talk about what I did on the weekend. I'm editing. That's an exhausting thing. If you've never tried it, just for a day, try to change the pronouns of your spouse and just talk about it. It's exhausting. Mm-hmm. And I did it for a very long time. So if I'm leaving something at the door, I'm not going to be able to be as productive and engaged. So the onus is on the employers to create the space where if I choose, I can be open about myself. That's all they can do. It's the only control they have. It's not like they can put a gun to my head and say, you have to come out, because that would be weird. Why would they do that? But if they create the space, then it's my choice. If they're not creating the space, I don't have a choice.
Right. So what are some things, some particular things, specific things in which employers and organizations can do that ensure that safe space? The hiring process, does it begin there? Where is that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so I always say, let's put the inclusion first. And we use the analogy of a garden. If a plant's having trouble growing, it's not the seed's fault, it's the soil. So, first things first is to make sure that your environment is inclusive. That's things like policy reviews. So making sure that your policies are inclusive of LGBTQ2+ folks. And there's a variety of things there. Like, do you have parental leave policy versus maternity leave policy? You're going to say, please.
I was just saying, I love that part in the book when you talked about that.
Yeah, thank you. Using they and them, using gender neutral pronouns. Because as soon as I see he and she in anything, immediately I'm like, oh, well, they still think of gender as a binary. Mm-hmm. And those are the types of things that people will look for, they will see. So policies, then your procedures. How do those policies get operationalized? And looking at making sure that they are being operationalized as they are supposed to, as opposed to what happens, which is there's always exceptions to the rule. Creating safe space is about education, making sure that your people are educated, that they understand the fundamentals of LGBTQ2+ inclusion, they understand what safe space looks like, and they understand their role in it. Ultimately, safe space is not something an organization can do. They can lay the groundwork, but it's really an individualistic thing, because all of us have the ability with our words and actions to create exclusionary spaces. Therefore, the onus is on us to create inclusionary spaces through little actions. So education is important. Things like a safe space champions program or positive space champions program, where you actually train people to be ambassadors of safe space. They become these champions that sort of proliferate through the organization, and their responsibility for kind of being that voice of safe space. There's symbolism, the infamous rainbow flag. Mm-hmm. That is a universal symbol that people look to know that they're safe, to know that they are welcome. And if I have time, I've got time, I'll tell you a little anecdote. So I used to work at KPMG, the accounting firm. And when I started in the organization, I was in the IT consulting practice. I was out but I was fairly certain that I was the only LGBTQ2+ person, because there was no mention of sexual orientation or gender identity and expression in any policy. There was no employee resource group. There was nothing. I was the only gay in the village. And I knew that couldn't be the case, but I didn't know how to find my tribe.
Sure.
And this is going back a long time. And then I went to Pride. I started in March and I went to Pride in June. And I opened up Extra Magazine, which was our queer publication. And there was a full page ad. And it said, KPMG salutes the LGBT community with pride. And I thought, what the hell is going on? There's a party going on and I have not been invited. Not the point. The point is that was the symbol I was looking for. And that moment led me to get involved with a group that created an employee resource group that saw a lot of people come out as LGBT, including the CFO, including partners. It was that one symbol. So symbolism is a really important part of safe space, as is celebration, right? Like I will go to the opening of a door if there's a glass of wine on the other side. Not cupcakes. Everyone's obsessed with cupcakes, rainbow cupcakes.
Yeah.
It's June. I have not had a carb in 6 months at that point. Do not do that. July, right. I'm going to stick my head in a cake. Sorry, that's such a gay stereotype.
You know, we're always looking out for those carbs and sweets.
It is such a gay stereotype.
Avoiding,
It's a funny one. But celebrations are a great way to send a message that you are welcome here. And then signage. So putting up a sign, this is a safe space. And there's lots of different ones. I'm sure you've got one at your school, stickers that end up on doors in different places. And it's really important. It may seem like a really simple thing, but consider that a lot of LGBTQ2+ people are the invisible minority.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So we have passing privilege. Walking down the street, you're not going to look at me and go, oh, he's gay.
Right.
He's gender nonconforming. But until I see that sign, I don't know if I'm safe. And considering the situation for LGBTQ2+ people as it relates to violence, I'm going to wait till I see the sign. Thanks very much.
That's right. It's this affirmation, right? We want to be affirmed. We want to be validated in our existence, right? And those are the ways in which, you know, I think about, we had a student, I received a phone call from a student. Susan is her name. She's very public with this story. And so I'm not in violation of any of those confidentiality pieces, but Susan gave a call. Susan had stepped away from the university for a while. And was working full time at actually here in town at Bowen, and that's also a part of this story. And she called and she said, Vincent, listen, I want to return, but when I was there, I had a real hard time because I was being misgendered and misnamed. And is there a way for a name change policy to go in place? We didn't have it. And because of that conversation that I had with her, and I outed myself to her and said, I certainly understood that, I began that process, right? And we first rolled it out for students, but it was hard. You had to work with IT, you had to work with the registrar's office, you had to work with and the admissions offices to make sure all of those various systems communicated and talked together, right? And so the first time students, you know, as we were launching this, they'd have to go into a system and update it. But now it's just a part of our process, our admissions process. So students, from the moment in which they're interested in Webster University, they have that as an option. So from day one, they don't have to worry about that, right? And she called to say, Vincent, I thank you so much. But she also talked about how her employer, Boeing, spent so much time helping train her colleagues, helping to create space for her so that she could feel comfortable throughout her own transition. And it has just lifted her up, she said, right? And it lifts me up knowing that she then is lifted up as well, right? And it's that we just want to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also interesting how language changed, right? So it was, the preferred change, preferred name change policy, and then it's the chosen name policy, and that's one of the things that I hear you saying it with the plus piece. It's always evolving, also, and our
Always.
language is always evolving.
This is a conversation, Vincent, that has changed while we were talking about it.
Yes, right. Yes.
And we are in very much the vanguard of the evolution and revolution, particularly around gender, but also around sexuality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When I came out just before Confederation, you had two options.
Okay.
You were gay or you were straight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And bisexuality, it was like a way station before you got to gay.
Right.
And when I think about the identities that exist now, it just makes so much more sense.
Right.
And we are still going through a lot of learning. And that's something I think we, as members of the LGBTQ plus communities, need to be open to and patient with, to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
We don't give a pass to everybody.
Right.
But at the same time, we need to be a bit patient to say, you're catching up. It's not as simple as, hey, I want to, my name is changing. Okay, there's a process now, but there may not have been a process before.
Yeah. And there's a certain amount of grace on which we have to have and are willing to extend. Folks, I think it's a difference when people intentionally say, nope, I'm not going to learn this. Right.
Absolutely.
Versus those, one of our student at the university also decided to then go by they, them. Mm-hmm. And it was a process for me to learn. And, I felt really bad about it. And they were like, you're learning, it's okay. Right. Yeah. But because they saw my effort and, feeling pained about it, they extended a lot of great grace to me. Let's talk a little bit about the pink dollar. Shane mentioned that in the introduction, and people are talking about it and the spending power of our community. How much is the pink dollar really worth?
So I took there's some information. There's an organization called LGBT GDP. Okay. And by their estimates, the pink dollar is worth $1.1 trillion. And if we estimate that there's about 23 million LGBTQ2 plus people in Canada and the United States, that means that per LGBTQ2 plus person, the GDP is $47,826.09. And yes, I'm reading that from the book. I don't have that memorized. But what that means is that the value of the pink dollar exceeds the GDP, the value of African American and Black Americans, of Hispanic and Latinx Americans, of Native Americans. It is only Asian Americans and white Americans that have a higher spending power, and it's not by much. And I mention that not because that should be the motivator, but those are the types of things that get people's attention. And I think about different advertising campaigns. There was an advertising campaign, Walt Disney, Cheerios, Procter & Gamble, somebody did an advertising campaign, and it involved a queer family. Okay. And the organization 1 Million Moms, bless their hearts, bless them. They were boycotting. I can't remember which it was. Anyway, they were boycotting. And frankly, the organization looked at the value of 1 Million Moms versus the value of the LGBTQ2 plus community and said, we're putting our chips over here.
Right.
Because this is worth more.
Right.
They didn't do it because they're the best people in the world. They did it because they're in business to make money. I'm okay with that because ultimately it ends up helping our community. And so it's a win-win. We benefit, they benefit. And I think over the past number of years, we've seen that. I think about Walt Disney as an example in the recent Don't Say Gay bill. Maybe they didn't respond quickly enough, and it shows. And we also have to remember that it's not just about us. It's about our friends and family and coworkers who are, my mother, there's no world in which she's giving her money to an organization that isn't LGBTQ2 plus friendly. That is not happening.
Right.
And so it's, they're not stupid. They're also counting the number of heads in addition to those 23 million people.
And I think these organizations also, companies rather, recognize this brand, this loyalty that so many of us within the community have also.
Absolutely. We are very, very loyal to brands that support us. And I regularly look up brands' commitments to LGBTQ2 plus inclusion, both internal and external, because I'm not going to get caught giving money to an organization that doesn't necessarily support my community. I have choices.
Lots of choices. I know Shane is preparing to take us into the Q&A, but I have one more quick question for you. You talked about your mom. You talked about your mom supporting by not, purchasing from said location or business. What's the difference between an armchair ally and an active ally?
Oh, great question.
Yeah, and are there, 3 things a person can do to be more of an active ally within our community?
Yeah, this is a relatively new concept for me. And in the book, this was the first time I really articulated the difference. An armchair ally is someone who says they're an ally and then doesn't do anything about it. An armchair ally is someone who goes to pride festivals, but, and isn't offended by the nudity. How brave of them. An armchair ally is someone who watches RuPaul's Drag Race, which I'm obsessed with.
I am too. I'm going back to the early episodes, season 3 right now.
Yeah, avoid season 1. It's just
Chandler. Yeah.
Oh, Chandler. Anyway, we could. That's another conversation. An active ally is someone who is actively participating, who is using their privilege, whether they are straight or cisgender, to create better spaces for members of the LGBTQ2 plus community. So I am an active ally for trans people, that I'm actively working to ensure that trans people are heard. I'm leveraging my privilege as a cisgender person to the advantages of others. But it is active is the key word there. You actually have to participate. It's not enough just to say, oh, I'm an ally, and then go back to doing nothing.
To post that quote.
Yeah. How brave of you.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Here's a perfect example. Blackout Tuesday after George Floyd died. Everyone posted the black square on Instagram. How very brave of you, Miss Kardashian.
Right.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. It's an active participation. And if I could, let me think of 3 things that a person can do. One is simply just to show up and say, I'm here. I'm willing to do my part. You then ask what you can do and then do it. No one's expecting you to be a savior. I don't need you to fix things for me. But show up, ask the question what I can do, and then do it. Understand that you are a guest in our journey. And, it's like being a guest in someone's home. You don't show up and redecorate. You respect the person's home. So you're a guest in our journey. Be respectful of that. So that's first. Educate yourself. It is not my responsibility as a queer person to educate straight cisgender people. Well, okay, technically it is my job, but it's not all LGBTQ plus people's jobs to educate straight cisgender people. Educate yourself. Read a book. I don't know. Maybe there's one available at Left Bank. I heard. Read a book. Watch a TV show. Read an article. Immerse yourself in that journey. And the key to education is just to be open to it. Understand that everyone's lived experience is different. And there's not a definitive course you can take and be like, okay, I'm taking LGBTQ2 plus 101 and I know everything.
Right.
That's not a thing. Because everyone's lived experience will be different. So educate yourself and be open to the learning. And then stand up to inequity. So when you hear a joke or an offhanded comment, regardless of whether or not an LGBTQ2 plus person is there, and regardless of the intention of the person who said it, you have to stand up. You have to say, listen, that's not okay. That language is inappropriate here, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't use those kind of terms here. The first time, you take them aside, you have a chat, you do it very non-confrontationally, respectfully. Hopefully they learn from it. If it happens again, you call HR, right? There's processes in place to deal with issues of discrimination. And someone has to stand up. If we all did that, if everyone stood up to inequity, and I'm talking about inequities of all kinds.
Probably, sure.
They go away overnight because the people that are the perpetrators of those things are actually vastly in the minority. They're just really noisy. And so if we all stood up and said, yeah, no, that's not okay here, we sort of take the oxygen out of their room and they don't have anywhere to go. So those would be my 3 tips.
And with the education piece, I would just say Google. Right? Like Google
Absolutely.
is out there and everyone has it. Yeah. Thank you.
Great point, Vincent.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank both of you for having this conversation, for teaching me new things. I honestly am always happy to learn new things, and I love learning new things about the queer LGBTQ plus community that I did not know before. And Michael, we also share a lot of similarities because, yeah. I first off want to just say how important this book is, and thank you, Vincent, for leading the discussion on this in such an expert way. I do have a couple of questions of my own and want to thank the audience for being here this evening. We have a couple of comments that I want to touch on and a couple of my own questions. So one thing, when you were discussing, my friends and I are in a group chat, and they are having incredible difficulty ridding themselves, and these are one non-binary and 2 female identifying women that struggle with getting rid of saying you guys. And I'm not from the South, but I have been saying y'all for years because it just is like, I get so, like, it feels weird when someone in public calls me sir, and I'm like, I guess that's accurate, but does it really fit? And if anyone calls me bro, I'm like, you read this way wrong. Like, there is not a single part of me that is a definition of bro.
Bruh.
No. Yeah, bro. No.
Yeah, bro.
Even worse.
Or buddy. Buddy makes my skin crawl.
Yeah.
I think I'm okay with buddy.
Oh, really? Oh, that one. I don't know what that's about, but I heard it and I was like, oh, what?
Well, it is kind of demeaning. Like,
It's
hey,
a
buddy.
visceral reaction. Yeah.
Like, you're gonna ask me for something that I don't want to give you. Yeah. But yeah, saying y'all is like, it feels cozy. It is inclusive, and I love saying it. And it's Y apostrophe ALL. There will
Of
be
course.
so many arguments about the spelling of y'all. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, since it is kind of in the conversation today in the news, and companies that make missteps, and this Billiken Racer also kind of talked about this. We all make mistakes. We're all human. Businesses can make large mistakes that will make a lot of people angry. As humans, as individuals, like, how do we kind of course correct ourselves? So, like, if I misgender someone, apologize, go on, and like just genuinely mean, like, and correct yourself. But there are companies that they say they're sorry and then maybe don't actually fix things. So how do we encourage them? How do we see a company actually take meaningful steps to fix when they make a mistake? And it could be an easy one, or it could be a Disney one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a big one.
Yes. I think, we're, and Vincent, please chime in here. I think we're all bound to make mistakes. That's going to happen. We're going to make mistakes. So let's just assume we're going to make mistakes. We're human, ergo we're flawed. It's how you respond to those mistakes. And I think Disney, let's just talk about Disney, because this is front and center. This is a perfect example of, okay, you did not respond correctly. How are you going to fix this? Netflix is another one with the Dave Chappelle special. I don't think they've fixed it, frankly. And it's how you respond. I talk about Target in the book. And if you're not familiar with the infamous story of Target, number of years ago, their CEO made a significant donation. I think it was about $150,000 to an organization in Minnesota that supported candidates that were very anti same-sex marriage. And the CEO doubled down and kept reading from his talking points and didn't really think it was going to be a big issue. And in the end, there were huge boycotts by the LGBTQ+ communities against Target. You have to be able to respond quickly and learn from your mistake. And that's ultimately what matters, is how you make a mistake, how you respond to a mistake. I have a wonderful friend, my friend Shep, who is non-binary. And as an avid consumer of Drag Race, I call everyone girl. And the first, Shep and I were having dinner, and the first time I said, "Oh, girl," and I saw the look on their face, and I was like, "Yeah, but I don't mean that you're a girl." And they were like, yeah, I know. I totally get it. It's how you pivot from that. It's how you respond. Mm-hmm. Don't make a big deal about it, particularly when it's an individual. Don't make a crisis out of it. Say, "I'm really sorry. I just made a mistake." Correct yourself, move on, learn from your mistake. Organizations are the same thing. They need to learn from their mistake and move on. It has taken Target nearly a decade to get back into the good graces of the queer community. You don't want to, that's not a good example.
Yeah, and I would add to it, we need to be able to own that mistake. And in terms from the corporate space, I'm often, we saw this a lot with, George Floyd and the days after George Floyd, right? And all these corporations coming forward, right? It's not about a PR statement, right? But it also matters, and this gets back to your point earlier, Michael, about the inclusion piece, right? When we have people at the table helping to guide along the way, not when all of a sudden a situation arises, do you then go find your LGBTQ folks, right? They should be a part of your team all the way along the way, so that when you are thinking about these things, that they are there front and center and not in response to. And, I think of that in terms of, being Black and sitting at the table, right? It's important that people who are of the marginalized communities be a part of the conversation on the front side, not after the mistake has been made and now we want to have these relationships or extend out dollars and then we go back to business as usual.
100%.
One thing that I forget where you're talking about it, but I wrote down queer leadership and seeing it. And it's similar to seeing Black leadership and seeing people in positions of power. You are, when you're going into a company, and I have been thankfully blessed by working, I think, almost all my entire adult career life for companies that were queer owned. Occasionally I have bartended in places that were not queer owned, but or LGBTQ2 plus owned, but underneath a lot of the spectrum, fitting in that category. So it's been I've been very lucky in that regard. And I've chosen to work in places that identified as that. Not everyone has that privilege and that kind of. So I'm wondering if you have advice for people entering the workforce that might not be going into larger companies that have equity and inclusion committees, that have safe spaces already there for them, how they can begin to see themselves as safe. Because the queer community, we work in a lot of restaurants and we work in a lot of retail where there aren't places that are immediately identified as being safe.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Because it's one thing to go work for Boeing or Webster's or whoever, where it's clear, right? We can Google it. We can look it up on your website and find the employee resource group, or we can find the student group. And, if you're walking into a small office, you don't know what their policies are. And again, as the invisible minority, we continue to look for that sign. I am a proponent of putting something overt about your sexual orientation on your resume or LinkedIn. Because, if I see that you were a member of the, queer student group at university or college, my natural inclination, regardless of what I know about you, my natural inclination is going to assume you're a member of the community, even if you're an ally. So that's a way to say to the employer, hey, I'm here. And if they're homophobic, they're just not going to call you. Saves you a whole lot of trouble. I think it's also important for younger people to have the confidence of self. There's nothing wrong with you. You are beautiful, fabulous people. And don't apologize for who you are. I am not apologizing, honey. I am fierce. And I am not saying I'm sorry. So if an employer doesn't want you because you are a member of the LGBTQ2 plus communities, that's their loss. And there will be 100 employers lined up who want you, who want to create a space where you can be your fabulous self. And I say that because I lived with so much shame about my sexual orientation for so long. Even after I was out, there was so much internalized homophobia until I was in my 30s. And now I'm too old to care. So it's easy for me to say, but have faith in yourself, believe in yourself, and the world will love you for your fabulousness.
Can I add something, Shane?
Please.
Yeah.
I think fit and representation matters, right?
Yes, sir.
Are kind of my takeaways on that one. I haven't, when you said it's important to put on your resume something that indicates that orientation piece. For me, the last 3 jobs, I intentionally, on the first part of the interview, identified myself as gay. Because I wanted to also see how the interviewer responded to that, right? Because I think so often we look at job interviews as I need to figure them out, or they need to figure me out. But it's also this two-way street. And we forget the fact that we need to also make sure that the place where we're going allows for us to show up in our most full self. Now, I know that I say this because as a Black man first, right, that has become a large part of my journey as well. And the intersectionality of the two come. And to your point, I'm privileged in that I can sit and have this conversation, and most people may not know that I'm gay, right? But I want you to, in fact, know that I'm gay so that we can understand where each of us then stands. Each time I have an opportunity to say before students, I always identify myself as being gay, because each time I now say it, it's almost like reclaiming it for each time in my youth that I was ashamed for it, right? And so each time I now am proud of it and I put it out there by owning it. But I also do it because I also want the students to know that representation does in fact matter, and that I can be the chief diversity officer reporting directly to the chancellor and be gay, publicly, outwardly gay. And I want them to see me. I actually had a student who identified as trans before her class while talking to me on a Zoom back, when we were all living our lives on Zoom 24/7. And I was talking about some diversity stuff, and I identified myself as gay. And she outed herself as trans. And I asked, did her class know? She said no. And I said, why? And she said, because you said that you were gay. And because you said that you all at the university, you had hosted several other trans women for a conference that you facilitate. And I feel seen and I feel safe. So that representation piece matters. And I don't think that we should be embarrassed about that. And we should put it out there to check these prospective employers and their understanding of it.
I have stories of my own that I would love to share. A brief one about just being yourself and allowing other people to see that self, because I have had customers specifically come up to me and ask me like if I could help them find a book, and like I'm looking for a mystery, maybe with a gay main character. And it's like, yes, I am here for you. You saw this, you read this correctly, and let's go. So yeah, it feels so good to have that safe place that you can provide to people as well. So yeah, I want to look for a safe place, but I also want to be a safe place. So that's powerful. Yeah. All right, we've gone over time, and I honestly just so appreciative of this conversation. There's so much to learn. There's so much to do. And I hope that everyone watching, first off, thank you for watching. And I hope you buy the book, give the book to your friends, give the book to your boss, maybe, whoever needs this book in your life, so that we can all just move forward and become better people. So I'm thankful, Michael, that you wrote this book. Vincent, I'm thankful that you were able to ask such amazing, incredible questions and share so much insight and value as well. So
thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I forgot to remind everyone that there are
Stickers.
stickers and luggage tags, and I have the
Magnets.
magnets up on my bookshelf, so they will stay there forever. But yes, those are available for anyone that orders a copy of the book from Left Bank Books. We will be sending stickers, magnets, postcards, bookmarks, the luggage tag, and I think there's one other thing. I took a picture of a lot of it and put it on Facebook, but it's there, and those will go along with books to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world when you order a copy from Left Bank Books.
Fantastic.
All right. And I hope everyone watching that you have a great rest of your evening. And I forgot to share the link for how to make a donation to MTUG for our Trans Day of Visibility. I forgot to put that in the chat. So I will be making a donation as soon as we conclude this event to MTUG, St. Louis Metro Trans Umbrella Group. And I encourage everyone to do so as well. All right. Thank you and good night, everyone.